That's so cool. Oh my God, you're so fun.
You should pick the corner for the couch.
Yeah.
The corner of the couch?
Yeah, make yourself.
Move that against the couch.
Oh, I was thinking snuggle against Mary
Or you
Kate
could-
when she came, but that's
Oh, okay.
Now you killed my
Hey,
Kyle.
what up?
Over there. Oh, that's good.
Hi, Devin. Hey, hey.
Do you want?
Yes, I think
You failed miserably.
Okay, so awesome. Thank you. So good.
You want to sit on the pillow?
Thank you.
Okay, so first and foremost, I thought a warm, hearty applause for Carrie and Mark Sisson. Very generous
Introduce you guys.
in
Well,
opening up your beautiful
You want to
homes to us.
introduce?
Oh, everybody. No.
But you may introduce us if you feel so inclined. I
That's
don't want to
okay.
rob you of that opportunity.
No, I'm comfortable now.
Ah,
Ah, this feels good. So beautiful. This home is so gorgeous. I'm kind of blown away by it. I thought that it would be fun to begin with a funny story that just came to mind. That when we were driving up here, Rohini and I were talking, and I said to her, "What happens if I find myself in this situation where I just completely space out and I can't think and I can't have anything to say? What am I going to do? What are you going to do?" And she turns to me, she said, "Well, I'll just tell everybody that you suffer from ADD, and that you're off thinking about a squirrel somewhere." Which I didn't really like the sound of that very much, because I didn't want everyone thinking I had ADD for a start. But it actually, it brought forward for me this idea, and then seeing your dog also, it reminded me of something that happened years ago. And don't worry, this is very much on point, because I feel like it just, because we're going to be talking about state of mind, so it just kind of shows how the thinking can move in and out of suffering very easily. So years ago we used to have this golden retriever called Polo, when we first came to LA, I think it was. It's a bit of a disgusting story, so bear with me. I'm sorry that you've just eaten. But so Polo, the golden retriever, would go into the kitchen of an evening, eat his evening meal, and then we'd be sitting in the living room, and then he would come out, and then he would start retching. He'd come out, and he basically would puke his guts up on the living room rug. And this would go on. It wasn't like it was every night, but it would happen more often than not.
I can't believe you're starting this story, but anyway, go on.
It's going somewhere, trust me. So more often than not this would happen, and then then one night he came, and you couldn't look at him. If you caught his eye, it would set him off. It would start feeling like he was going to wreck. But anyway, he came in one night, and he looked like he was going to throw up. He started to heave, and then I shouted out, "Squirrels! Squirrels!" And the dog's ears pricked up. He looked all excited, started looking around the room, and just the whole idea of nausea left him completely. And so anyway, fast forward a couple of years, and Rohini was very pregnant with, I don't know if you were very pregnant, but you were
The beginning stages.
the beginning stage, I guess, with our first child. And she had morning sickness, which I don't want to minimize the effects of morning sickness, because it's never fun. But, and she was, having a hard time with it, I guess. You were being sick, as it were. And then one morning we were sat at the breakfast table, and she was sitting opposite me. Rohini was sort of, she started looking like she was not feeling very well, she was looking pale. And I looked at her a little bit concerned, and she looked at me and said, "I think I'm going to throw up." I said, "You go, really?" "Yes, I think I'm going to throw up." "Really?" "Yes, I think I'm going to throw up." But then she looked like she was literally going to throw up all over me, so I yelled, "Squirrels!" And she immediately started laughing. And it just really, if ever there was a demonstration about how your thoughts and your thinking that can take you very quickly towards suffering, that was, for me, a prime example. So I'm sorry. So anyway, where I wanted to really begin tonight was to really encourage you all to let go of your analytical minds when you start to listen to what we're going to talk about when we talk about the three principles. Because if nothing else, this understanding really speaks to the idea that insight only ever really comes through a quiet and settled mind. So if you're going to be inclined to hold on to the form of what we say and get really stuck on that and really rake that over with your intellectual thinking, it's going to really steer you in the wrong direction. So I would encourage you just to really go with your gut, go approach it from a feeling level. That would be the way to listen to us this evening. Because the gut's going to be a much greater harbinger of truth than your intellect will ever be. So, I guess I've been talking a lot. I shall continue.
Are you having a moment of ADD?
I'm having a squirrel moment. I am having a squirrel moment.
I wanted to just thank all of you for coming tonight. I mean, this is amazing that so many people showed up, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules. So thank you. I'll let you continue.
So I wanted to say, don't get too hung up on the form. But that's not to say that we're not going to use form to talk about the principles tonight. We're going to use it more as a means to point you in the right direction, kind of lay the table, so to speak, and maybe hopefully provide you with a few tasty insights to take home. Anyway, on the subject of something tasty, I thought I would. This is actually a perfect segue for me to start with my favourite way to start a conversation about the principles, which is to compare them to Indian restaurants in London. And Indian restaurants in London, you probably don't know this, but they are, in fact, across the country, they are considered to be the most successful eating outlets. And the reason for this is this base sauce that they use. And so it makes great economic sense, because it means that they don't have to make anything, from scratch. They have this base sauce that becomes the base ingredients for everything that they put on their customers' table. So when someone comes in and wants to order something new off the menu, they have this pot of sauce permanently simmering on the stovetop. So all they have to do is take a bowl or plate, add a dollop of sauce, add a few more ingredients, and Bob's your uncle. You got chicken vindaloo, tikka masala, vegetable korma, you name it. There's an endless array of different things that they can make from this one base sauce. So I don't want to get too carried away with this analogy, but it's basically the principles for me it's the same as that sauce. They underpin and inform our entire human experience, our entire human psychology, if you like. So again, I don't want to, I've talked about not getting hung up on form, but I think that's probably because I personally got really hung up on form when I first came to the principles. I was obsessed with trying to sort of reverse engineer it, deconstruct it, kind of find out what the methodology is, kind of deconstruct in a way that I guess car manufacturers were trying to figure out what was going on with Tesla when it first came on the scene, before Elon Musk started to make that technology available to everybody. But I felt like I was banging my head against the brick wall. I really wanted to know what is the methodology here, and it was frustrating because I kept meeting principle-based practitioners, and whether it be therapists or coaches, and they had so much anecdotal evidence of these incredible success stories. So I was just thinking there has to be something so much more elaborate to me than what I'm seeing, which seems so simple. But the fact is, it is really simple, and I'm sure you will be inclined to have a similar reaction to me, because coming from my background, I really wanted to know what the methodology was. But again, after a while, I began to realize that it was that simple. So what could be simpler than the idea that we are all blessed with innate mental health, that we are all blessed with innate mental well-being? And I know that for me at this point is jumping the gun a bit, but it really is a great way for me to start talking about the first principle, which is the principle of mind. So the principle of mind, in common parlance, would probably be, depending on your spiritual, philosophical theosophical background would be, you could describe it as the Buddha, the Godhead, the inner counselor, impersonal mind. I personally prefer universal intelligence. Actually, I might prefer impersonal mind. I think I like that more. But that is the impersonal mind, and I kind of see it like it's almost being like this otherworldly radio station that you can tune into if you can quiet your mind, if you can lower the static inside your head. For me, that's how you find that frequency. And there are many ways that, again, depending on preference, how you can get that access point, how you can tune in. And again, based on personal preference, it could be through prayer, it could be through meditation, it could be through walking your dog, it could be through painting, it could be through exercise. There's any number of different ways that you could do that. But that's the idea of it's hard to give form to the formless, but that really for me is the idea of impersonal mind. So then moving on, moving forward as it were, we come to the principle of consciousness. And the principle of consciousness, actually first, before we get on to the principle of consciousness, we are really encouraged in this understanding to use metaphors. Because metaphors they say is a great way of giving form to the formless. So, because I come from a photographic background, I often sort of lean in that direction. So for me, a great metaphor for the principle of consciousness is the lens in a movie projector. So the lens in a movie projector, if you can imagine that as the principle of consciousness, it takes the light, in this case is the light force from the principle of mind, and it projects it through that lens, and we get awareness. So, actually I feel like a drawing coming on.
Angus is a very good artist, but it's a liability if anybody plays Pictionary. You don't want him on your team.
Yeah, I really slow the whole process down. So, now she's really put the pressure on. So let's say that the sun is a great example of something that gives life force, and therefore can be a great symbol for the impersonal mind, principle of mind, the Godhead, the Buddha, whatever you want to call it. So that's my sunny sun there. And so let's imagine that this is us. With my big chin. And then I see the principle of consciousness as being like this big lens, maybe in the top of our heads. Actually, another metaphor I like too, and I'm going to get carried away with metaphors this evening, is I like the idea of the aperture in a camera that regulates the amount of light that gets onto the film plate. So if we can lower the static inside our thinking, then that aperture becomes bigger and wider, and more light will hit the film plate. And the film plate, I guess, will eventually be maybe described as the principle of thought, but we'll get to that in a second. So here is our principle of consciousness, here is our principle of mind, shining light. We tune into the principle of mind, impersonal mind. And then inside ourselves, we can imagine that there is this big projector screen. And then the principle of thought comes into play when the light, which is controlled by our principle of consciousness, hits this screen. And there, this place, we get understanding. We get to have our own thoughts, our own thinking, whatever they may be, however exciting they may be. And then this is when we get to play our own movie. We get to create our own understanding. We get to create our own memories, and from our memories and from our thoughts we get feelings. So that is that's the principle of thought. So that's my spin on the three principles. Now at this point I am sure you're all thinking and wondering, well, I know all this. This is what's so new about all this information. I've heard of all this before. And I guess what I will say is that what really for me is the most important feature is this idea of innate mental health, of innate mental well-being. And if you really, again, look at the first principle and imagine that the first principle, it's not even the first principle, there's no numerical order to it, but the principle of mind is a place where the Godhead, the inner counselor, impersonal mind, whatever you want to call it, exists. There is just no suffering there. That is not a place of suffering. That is, in fact, a place of love. So if that's the case, it's not much of a jump for us to realize that for all these different modalities that are out there that claim that when you have an issue, that something inside needs fixing, and that we have to have all these processes and techniques, that all becomes a little bit redundant. For me, that doesn't really make a great deal of sense. If we believe that that place is intrinsically a part of ourselves, that place of loving and non-suffering, then we have this internal compass point that will always steer us in the direction of innate well-being. Isn't that right, Shanti? Squirrel. Thank you.
Should I jump in?
Yes, please do.
So I want to echo what Angus is saying about recognizing that what he's describing as the three principles are constructs. They're labels. The understanding what the labels are doesn't help us to see the truth. So that's why he said earlier to really not focus on looking at this through the analytical mind and really listen for the feeling that comes up inside and listen to the deeper part of your wisdom. And that any construct is going to have its limitations. And we're not saying that this is better than other things. For myself, as I got a deeper understanding of the principles, I found myself having a greater appreciation for the teachings from USM, a greater understanding of the spiritual and philosophical learnings that I got there. And there may be methodological differences, but the heart of it, for me, I understood more and it impacted me more as a result. So really it's about using these three principles as a way to point towards understanding something that can't be understood with our intellectual mind, something that is beyond our comprehension, but using them as a tool to help us get a little bit more of an experiential knowing, even though we can't have an intellectual comprehension of it. And so that's where the metaphors and the analogies come in. And when I first was introduced to the principles, I can't say that I had a very open mind. In fact, I really came to them with quite a lot of arrogance, thinking that I already knew all this, and, like Angus said, what's the difference? This isn't any different than what I know already. But there was something that made me want to stay in the conversation as I kept studying with principles practitioners. There was a feeling that I was getting, and it was certainly helping me to experience more connection with my loving, experiencing more of an open heart, experiencing myself having less stress and anxiety. And I really didn't know why, and I couldn't really make heads or tails of it, but it just made me want to stay in that conversation. And then finally I had the opportunity to go up and do a 4-day intensive with Linda Pransky and one of her mentees. And so I jumped on the opportunity, and I went up there. They're in La Conner, Washington. So I flew up to Seattle, drove to La Conner, went straight into the first meeting. And we met for an hour and a half. I had a really clear intention to what I wanted to work on at the time. I was going to work on something. I wanted to feel less insecurity. I wanted to feel less self-doubt. I felt like I had too much of that going on, and I want to have less of it. And so I met with Linda and Leela, who was working with her. And Linda said, well, what do you know already about the principles? Like, what do you actually, not intellectually get, but what do you really know to be true about this? And so what I had got so far was that I knew that my feelings were a reflection of my thinking. Like, I could understand that I was not feeling something outside of myself, that what I was feeling was my own thinking. And she's like, that's great, that's wonderful. But where I went with that was, well, if my feelings are a reflection of my thinking, and I don't like certain feelings that I'm having, then I should be able to do something about it. And I should be able to not have those feelings because it's coming from me. And that's where I got really stuck, because the more I tried to change the feelings that I didn't like, the more they seemed to grow inside of me. So what Linda was, and we just had a conversation. We talked for maybe an hour and a half, the first meeting. And there was she was just explaining these principles to me. She was curious. She was, just asking me clarifying questions. And what she helped me to see was that I had it set up inside of myself that when I get caught up in my insecurity, when I get anxious, when I get scared, that when I'm in that state, I should be able to use something to get me out of that state immediately. I shouldn't have to endure those feelings, and there must be a way to do that like that. And that when I wasn't able to do that, I felt like something was wrong with me. I felt like I wasn't getting it. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I should be better. Look at me, I'm talking to people, I'm working with people, like I should be able to do this. And it was just so simple. She said to me, Rohini, you are never going to get that when you're in that state. That is not, you're caught up in a thought storm of negativity. That's normal, that's human, there's nothing wrong with you, but you're not going to experience your true nature and your authentic self when you're there. And the more you try to change it, the more you're going to get stuck in it. And can you just relax and allow yourself to be human, allow yourself to have this experience, and then you're naturally going to come back to your authentic self. And I was like, what? What? Because I was expecting there was something that I needed to do. And really what I saw in that moment was the pressure that I had been putting on myself for years to be better than I was, like this idea that I should be better than where I was at, that somehow I wasn't good enough. And as soon as I saw that, there wasn't any magic thing that happened, but as soon as I saw that, I just felt the weight of all of those judgments lift off of me. I felt the freedom, like, oh, I'm actually okay. I'm actually not, there's nothing wrong with me. I can actually trust that I'm going to always come back to my true self, my authentic nature, that I don't have to work at that. Like, that's not something I have to do anything to get there, that is my natural state. And so when I saw that, it's like my mood just went right up. My mind got super quiet. I just totally got blissed out, and I stayed in that state for about 4 days. And I was, at first it was like, if I move too quickly, is it going to go away? And then I realized, like, no, this is just me with a quiet mind. I can do things. I can go on walks. I can type emails. Like, I don't need to try to hold on to this. And I can't say that I had that peak experience forever, but I never went back in terms of looking at myself in the same way and pushing myself in the same way. And I could no longer see that as something to work with my clients on and to teach them. I could see how I was, previous to that, pointing people in the direction of trying to manage the world of form, trying to manage the world of what they've created in their thought content, rather than pointing them in the direction of their authentic self and their true nature, where there's pure potential there, and there's no healing needed, and that we just need a little taste of that, and everything drops away. And there's not, the thing with understanding the principles, they're not saying you have to do it this way. They're saying that any way that works for you is fine, and it's up to the individual as to what works. So it's like whatever helps me in that moment to have a more peaceful state of mind is what I'm going to do when I get caught up and gripped by my anxiety and insecurity. And there's been such a tremendous shift. Like tonight, even this morning, when I woke up, I was excited about coming and doing this talk. I was really looking forward to it, and I, so excited to see everyone here that we know and love. And I didn't feel anxious, and I was like, oh my God, where is that? Like I started looking for my self-doubt, but it's like it couldn't even get a grip on me. And that for me is the result of not trying, not striving, unconditional acceptance and realizing that in my humanness, I'm going to have the experience of all of the variety of emotions. And the metaphor that Linda used with me, and she said, you know, Rohini, when you go outside and walk in the rain, you don't get to choose the raindrops that fall on you. You just go and get wet. And so with the emotions, I realized that I don't get to choose the emotions that I experience. They're going to happen to me. And I don't have to get scared by these emotions because they're just reflecting thoughts that aren't real. They're just temporary. They're subjective. There's nothing solid about them. And so I can allow myself to have whatever that emotional experience is without having to get myself frothed up about it. Sometimes I still do. But when I'm able to just allow that to happen, then I kind of float back into my innate well-being, like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Rohini's natural state is articulation, as you know. I guess and I love what you were saying. I was still finding myself feeling a little bit attached to what I was talking about earlier about technique and process. Because I had this awareness or this sense that with technique and process, one of the reasons why I think it is fundamentally different from a lot of different or other modalities that are out there, which are the difference between the principles and those other modalities, is that technique and process really have a tendency to speed the mind up rather than slow the mind down. And I think from this understanding we recognize that slowing the mind down is where insight comes in. So I guess for me, if you're going to be, let's say you have a trauma that happens in your life, and that most of the suffering that comes from that trauma is going to be coming from your thinking process, from the thoughts that you have. So let's say there's a technique and process that wants you to go back and align yourself with those thoughts that really were all about suffering. It doesn't really, for me, make a great deal of sense from looking at it through the lens of this understanding, because that in itself will be a process of speeding your mind up when really we want to look to slow it down. And again, another metaphor that comes to mind is the idea that if you went and saw a movie that was really big on special effects, you would, no doubt, you might find that whole experience very exhilarating. You might have some cortisol running through your veins. You might get, very excited. It'd be a bit of a thrill ride. But at the end of the day, if all the emphasis is put on those special effects, which I guess in this case what I'm saying, the techniques and processes, then you're going to come out of that movie theatre feeling a little bit flat, because what you really want is the storyline. And the storyline, in the context of what I'm talking about here, is what are you doing to create your own story? What are you doing with your own thinking to create your own story? And that, I feel like, is where the emphasis needs to be put, rather than the technique and process for me.
And what I think you mean by that is, I'm not sure. So I don't think you're saying that we need to manage the story, are you?
No, not at all. I'm just saying that, I'm sorry, yeah, no, absolutely. We can get a little lost in the exhilarating experience of technique and process, in the same way that you can watching a movie, get lost in the special effects and miss the storyline, as it were.
So to bring it down, to sort of bring that metaphor down to more practical point, that one of the things that really stood out to me as a huge difference that was integrated into my life after going up and doing that intensive at Laconer was that, I really felt that there was a big shift in our relationship. And, Angus and I've dragged him to a lot of personal growth things over the years.
Yeah.
Some he's enjoyed, some he hasn't. And, we've been through very hard times, but we're in a good place. I thought, our relationship was fine. But then when I came back, I found myself really responding differently to your anger when you would get angry, and that
I
just...
never get angry.
I'll have to change my story now. And that, whereas in the past, I would take it very personally. I would get very hurt. I would feel, I feel that it was unfair. You know, I get into all of my thinking around it. And after that, what I saw when you would get upset, and I can't say I did this all the time, but much more often than not, certainly more often than I was able to before, was that I would just see that you were having a hard time. I would see that you were in a difficult place, that you'd had a hard day, that you were overwhelmed. And rather than going anywhere further with that, I would just have compassion that, oh, Angus is having a hard day, better give him some space. He's going to calm down eventually and come back to himself. This isn't who he is. This really is the man I love underneath all of that. And it really shifted me because I didn't lose my center as often. And the other thing that I noticed is that I didn't have to, after those times, that happened very rarely according to you, but after those times I wouldn't need to process it with you afterwards. Like in the past, there would have been like long conversations about how awful you are.
Days
how bad you are, and how you could do better.
processing course.
So it's like I didn't need to do that anymore. I realized, oh, he's not himself. He'll come back to himself, and no big deal. And that also gave me the room and the space for me not to be myself and to not judge myself when I wasn't at my best. That it's okay for me to have my meltdowns too, and I don't have to strive to be something that I'm not. I can just be where I'm at and have my flaws and frailties. And, you know, I wouldn't have to live with my shame around that. It was just, you know, you get over it. You have a bit of a thicker skin than I do. So that, for me, was a real up-leveling in sort of the quality of our relationship.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I guess this would be a good time for me to get into my defining moment. Because I am currently going through the mentee program that Rohini went through last year with Pransky and Associates, who are big exponents in this understanding. And then I can put that into context because Rohini, I guess, last year, who was going through the program, and you know, I witnessed the growth and the change in her over the course of that year. But initially, well, first and foremost, let me explain how it breaks down with Pransky and Associates. They actually, this mentee program, they expect you to come up 3 times a year for a week, and you will bring a client with you, and then they will mentor you through that process. So you coming up as a coach, and they'll mentor you through that process of coaching, although you're pretty much there watching them as a fly on the wall do their magic, work their magic. But so Rohini went through this process last year, or this program last year, should I say, and you know, I watched her change significantly. You know, very much on the relationship front, I could see how, you know, I was my typical normal reactive self, and then in the face of that reactivity, Rohini all of a sudden had this kind of whatever attitude, and I'm like,